The biggest claim in all of Christianity is that Christ actually resurrected from the dead. By saying that I believe in the resurrection implies that there is a God, he interacts with mankind, and he does miracles, but even more than that, he is the giver and taker of life. If he rose from the dead, that changes how we see ourselves, how we see God, and really validates Christianity in all its claims. So today I just want to briefly talk with you about why I believe in the resurrection. But before I do, I want to say I'm going to start this weekly thing where I talk about, some evidence and reason for Christianity. I want to do this because I don't believe that faith should be blind. I believe so many people, maybe believe what they believe in whatever faith or religion or whatever because they were either raised up that way or it feels good to them or something like that. And honestly, that shouldn't be the determining factors of why we believe what we believe. It should be whether it's true or not. I think God gave us minds and logic and reason, and that's one of the ways we can find him. If you're anything like me, I needed to know that Christianity was absolutely true before I just followed it. I didn't want something that would just make me feel good or whatever. I just wanted to know what was truth. So after looking into some of these things, I started to find that Christianity had a lot of evidence and reason backing it up and empowering my faith. So now I can confidently say, I do believe in the resurrection. So one thing we have to first accept and understand is that both secular and Christian historians accept these four things about Jesus. Both secular and Christian historians accept that Jesus existed and he lived and he was very popular. 1. 2. He was executed by the Romans on the cross. 3. The tomb was empty and his body was missing 3 days later. And 4. His followers claimed to have seen, touched, and spoken with the resurrected Jesus. Now that last one there, I get it. It sounds a little biased, but hear me out. The secular historians aren't saying that Jesus rose from the dead necessarily. They're saying that his followers claimed to have seen, touched, and spoken with the resurrected Jesus. So let's just touch on one of these now. Since both secular and Christian historians, so both here, if you're a Christian or not, we can both agree that Jesus lived, he was executed. And then there's one very important one here. The tomb was empty and his body was missing 3 days later. So if you're a true scholar and historian, you will look into the primary sources and in history and agree that the tomb was empty. Okay, I get that doesn't mean Jesus necessarily rose from the dead. So let's look at some other possible theories of what maybe happened. Okay, perhaps, the first one, maybe Jesus was drugged. The swoon theory. He was drugged and never actually died after his experience on the cross. But when he was in the grave, he passed out on the cross and he woke up in the tomb and never actually died. So he didn't resurrect, he just passed out. This one just doesn't make sense because honestly, if you look at Roman culture and study it, Roman soldiers would be killed if they didn't ensure that the person they're crucifying or executing was actually executed. So to ensure certain things, that they would do precautions, and especially since Jesus made a big claim. Jesus said he would raise from the dead 3 days later. So although his disciples didn't really get this claim, the Romans were just taking precautious measures to understand that this guy, they wanted to make sure he was dead. The Jews and the Roman culture just couldn't stand him. They wanted to make sure he was dead. So afterwards, what they would do to crucified people they were crucifying, is they would break their knees, which would force them to suffocate on the cross and they would die. And then not only that, they took a spear and drove it through Jesus' heart to make sure that he for sure was dead. So the fact that some people believe that Jesus was drugged and never actually died on the cross just doesn't make much sense. Okay, fair enough. Let's maybe the disciples stole the body, the stolen body theory. Jesus' body was stolen by his disciples, by which I would ask, for what motive? Honestly, for what motive would a bunch of people who followed Jesus, who witnessed him dying, and Peter denied Jesus 3 times while he was on trial, and very discouraged, their leader died. And you think that a bunch of fishermen wanted to go to a tomb of a dead man and steal the body for what reason? What good would that do? And not only that, the tomb was guarded by Roman soldiers. And kind of like if they didn't execute the person, they would be killed. If the guards who were guarding the tomb let a body be stolen from a tomb they're guarding, they would be killed. for letting the body be stolen. So they were guarding this thing, and you're saying that a bunch of fishermen came and overtook it from Roman guards. And think of Roman guards as some like modern day Marines. It just doesn't seem likely that some maybe scrawny guy can go up and steal something from a bunch of Marines who are well armed and ready to guard this thing and kill anyone who's going to steal the body. For once again, for what motive? So, the third one here is the twin brother theory. Okay, so Jesus had a twin brother or some substitute that looked like him that people actually believed was Jesus. The problem with this one is that when Christianity started to become a big movement and a big problem to the Jews in the Roman culture, is that they could have easily wanted to just shut down Christianity by saying, okay, this is not Jesus, he is not arisen from the dead, let's go to the tomb and just point out where Jesus' body is. It's still there. If there was a twin brother or a substitute or someone that looked like Jesus, that wouldn't change the fact that Jesus' body was still in the tomb and he was still dead. Okay, well, how about the disciples having ulterior motives? These are a bunch of guys who made up a lie of the resurrection to start a religion that would make them wealthy and famous. That's just not true. If you look at the lives of the disciples, they did not get health, wealth, or reputation from following Jesus. They seem to lose all of that, actually. If you look at the greatest conversion, perhaps in history, is the Apostle Paul. So Paul was Saul at first, and he was a Pharisee of Pharisees. So he had it all. He was a healthy guy. He even went around killing Christians, being really proud that he was following God by killing these Christians. And then he was wealthy because he was a Pharisee, yet also because he was a Pharisee, he had a great reputation with people, with Roman culture and amongst the Jews. So he gave up his health, wealth, and reputation one day when he met Jesus face to face. So it doesn't make sense for him to give up all those things to follow a lie. Fair enough, though, maybe he wasn't one of those disciples who walked with Jesus while he was still, living and doing his miracles and witnessed his death and resurrection. Fair enough. Let's look at the disciples. Peter was perhaps one of Jesus' closest disciples. And Peter denied Jesus 3 times, like we mentioned earlier, when Jesus was on trial. And suddenly, after witnessing the resurrection and the resurrected Jesus, Peter's life changed, and he had this boldness that he didn't have before. And the thing is, there's a difference from maybe someone believing nowadays something that was handed down to them 100 years later or an eyewitness account. Let me put this in perspective for you. The life of the apostles may be compared to the 9/11 terrorists. So, what the apostles and the 9/11 terrorists had in common is this. They both died for their beliefs. But the difference is the 9/11 terrorists trusted what others told them centuries ago. The difference with apostles is they were the eyewitnesses. They knew the truth if Jesus actually did rise from the dead or if he is dead. And so they knew this. So even if they made up a clever lie, they didn't increase their health, wealth, or reputation. So it doesn't make sense why they would make up a lie that doesn't increase any condition. I know sometimes in life we'll make up a white lie or maybe a big lie to get us out of something or to get us something. That sometimes makes sense to lie to improve your condition or your circumstances. I'm not saying it's right, but we sometimes do. But the disciples didn't have any ulterior motive that would have lying about the resurrected Jesus only led to them being brutally beat multiple times. Some of them were stoned. Some of them were wax put on and they were burnt at the stake, being candlelight for the emperor. And some of them were, like Peter, was crucified upside down after watching his wife be executed. And all they had to do, all the Roman culture was asking them to do, was to deny Jesus and say that what they were making up was a lie. They all died, but claiming that Jesus is who he said he was, that he was God incarnate, that he was the Son of God, that he is the giver of life, that he is the way, the truth, and the life. They all died making that claim. Hundreds and hundreds of people started following this Jesus and giving their lives gladly for them in early church history. And Jesus wasn't some stranger. He wasn't some stranger that these disciples and these apostles just preached about. People like, oh, I want to follow that guy, whoever it is. He was very famous in the Roman Empire. I mean, even extra biblical accounts of people that aren't even Christians wrote about this Jesus. Instead of saying he's a miracle worker, they said he's a sorcerer. Or instead of saying he's a Lord, they said he's a liar and a lunatic. The fact is, you can't ignore in history the historical accounts that Jesus lived and did miraculous things, however you want to attribute that. In that the fact that the tomb is empty and the body is missing, and it always has been, you have to make some kind of explanation for that in what launched the early church of Christianity. And so since everyone knew who this Jesus was, when the disciples proclaimed him as Jesus as his deity and his resurrection, people knew that the body was missing, and they had to give an explanation. Then they witnessed the disciples do miraculous signs and wonders to back up their claims. Then they even witnessed the disciples die in brutal deaths after being persecuted to say that this is true. So you know what? I believe in the resurrection. And I think I have the courage to say that I would die for my faith too. I surely hope I do. But the resurrection implies a few things. If you don't believe in Jesus, it implies that you probably should put your trust in someone that can raise himself from the dead. That's why I have no problem putting my trust in Jesus, because if he can raise himself from the dead, I trust he can raise me from the dead as well. And I don't know where you're at or anything, but please just thank you for watching. Leave a comment. Tell me what you liked, what you didn't like. And if you have any questions, I'm sure this is going to spark more questions, and I totally understand. This is only a 11, 12-minute video, so I understand this is probably going to cause more questions. How can you trust this or whatever? Bring it on. Let's talk about these things. Like I said, I'm going to make these videos on the weekly, so I want to answer more questions and start diving into this. So let's talk about these things. Leave a comment. Thank you for watching. Share the video. Tell others about what you learned. But the point is, believing in the resurrection isn't crazy. I have good reason and even some circumstantial evidence, which in court of law holds up sometimes greater than just a direct statement. Circumstantial evidence is not a bad thing. Don't think that. So I have circumstantial evidence and logical reason to believe that the resurrection actually happened and that Jesus is who he said he was, and he's the way, the truth, and the life. Thank you so much for watching.